It was the summer of 1872, in the colliery village of West Auckland, County Durham, in the north of England. The days were long and close, the air thick with the smell of coal dust and the soft haze of cooking fires. The streets of Johnson Terrace were narrow, their stones dark with soot, and from the backyards one could hear the steady percussion of the pit winding gear turning on the hill above the village. It was a working place, unremarkable in its poverty, its rows of terraced cottages pressing close against one another like books on a shelf. At number 13, Johnson Terrace, there lived a woman named Mary Ann Cotton. She was 39 years of age, broad-faced and capable-looking, with dark eyes and a manner that her neighbours described, in the months that followed, as composed, and she had lived in West Auckland for a little more than a year. She had arrived with children and had, it was noted, left with fewer. She took in lodgers and managed her household with evident competence. She was known to the local doctor, to the relieving officer of the poor law, and to the woman at the end of the row who sold eggs. What had happened inside that house on Johnson Terrace would take the better part of a year to understand, and what was discovered would appall the county entire. In the weeks before Charles Edward fell ill, the household at number 13 had been a place of quiet routine. Mary Ann rose early. She swept the step, fetched water from the standpipe at the end of the row, and tended to the small iron stove on which the porridge was set each morning, and her surviving children moved about the kitchen in the manner of children accustomed to narrow quarters and smaller portions. The lodger, a man named Quickmanning, was a customs and excise officer who paid his rent on time and gave no trouble. By the end of June, however, Mary Ann had visited the office of the local relieving officer, a Mr. Thomas Riley, to inquire whether Charles Edward might be admitted to the workhouse. She told Mr. Riley that the boy was an encumbrance. She said, it was noted afterward, that he would not be long in any case. Mr. Riley declined to place the child in the workhouse unless Mary Ann herself accompanied him, to which she did not agree. She returned to the house on Johnson Terrace, and nothing more was said of it. Within the fortnight, the boy was dead. Charles Edward had presented with symptoms that Dr. M. Kilburn, the attending physician, recorded as gastric fever. The child had vomited. He had complained of a burning in the stomach. He had been given light broth and kept from the cold. These were the established measures of the day, and they were applied without hesitation. On the morning of the 7th of July, Dr. Kilburn was called to the house and found the boy beyond any assistance. He was asked to provide a death certificate. He did so, noting gastric fever with convulsions as the cause of death. The burial was arranged within 2 days. It was at this point that Mr. Riley, returning from an errand near the terrace, encountered a neighbour who had heard of the child's death. He mentioned in passing what Mary Ann had told him, that the boy would not be long in any case, and the neighbour repeated it to another. By evening the remark had passed along the length of the row. Mr. Riley could not put the matter from his mind. He went the following morning to speak once more with Dr. Kilburn. Dr. Kilburn, to his credit, had retained a portion of the contents of the boy's stomach following the examination. He had done so without particular urgency, as a matter of professional habit, uncertain whether the death warranted closer attention. The conversation with Mr. Riley brought the matter into sharper relief. He submitted the retained sample for chemical analysis, and, in the meantime, spoke with those who had known the household at number 13. What he learned was not easily absorbed. It emerged through the inquiries of Mr. Riley, and through the careful recollection of neighbours and records officers, that Charles Edward was not the first to have died in Mary Ann Cotton's care. Her history, assembled piece by piece across the parishes of County Durham, Northumberland, and beyond, was one of extraordinary and repetitive loss. She had been married 4 times. 3 of her husbands were dead. She had borne or taken into her care a number of children across those years. The precise number was difficult to confirm, and a very great many of them had died in circumstances the attending physicians had recorded in each instance as gastric fever or inflammation of the stomach. There had been William Mowbray, her first husband, dead in 1865. Before him, 4 of their children in rapid succession. There had been George Ward, her second husband, dead within a year of the marriage. There had been James Robinson, from whom she had separated after the deaths of 3 more children in his household alone. There had been Frederick Cotton, her 4th husband, dead in 1871, His son Joseph had followed him within months. His son Frederick Jr. had followed Joseph. And now Charles Edward, the last of Frederick Cotton's children, was in the ground beside his brothers. At each remove, Mary Ann had collected the insurance monies. Each child, each husband, had been insured through one of the industrial burial societies that had become common among the working poor of the North, a penny or two a week, paid faithfully, against the cost of a proper burial. The sums were not large. They were, however, consistent. Nothing more had been thought of any of these deaths at the time. Each had occurred in a different town, before a different doctor, and was duly recorded and closed. The chemical analysis of the stomach contents retained by Dr. Kilburn was conducted on the 15th of July, 1872, at the laboratory of Dr. Thomas Scattergood, a lecturer in forensic medicine and toxicology at the Leeds School of Medicine. Dr. Scattergood was experienced in the detection of metallic poisons and applied the established Reinsch test, in which samples are exposed to a strip of clean copper in an acidic solution. Where arsenic is present, the copper strip will become coated with a grey metallic deposit that may then be further refined and measured. The strip returned a deposit. Dr. Scattergood conducted supplementary testing and submitted his findings in writing on the 22nd of July. He concluded that the stomach contents of Charles Edward Cotton contained arsenic in a quantity sufficient to have caused, or materially contributed to, the death of the child. He stated his findings plainly in the formal language of professional report, and forwarded the document to the coroner for County Durham. Mary Ann Cotton was taken into custody on the 25th of July, 1872, by Sergeant Thomas Hutchinson of the Durham Constabulary. She was apprehended at No. 13 Johnson Terrace without incident. She was calm, it was noted. She made no immediate statement. She was conveyed to Bishop Auckland and formally remanded in custody by the magistrates that same afternoon. The charge as first preferred was the wilful murder of Charles Edward Cotton. An inquest had been opened on the 8th of July and adjourned to permit the chemical examination. It was now reconvened before the coroner, Mr. George Graham, at the King's Head public house in West Auckland, which served, as was common practice at the time, as the nearest convenient assembly room. Witnesses were called. Mr. Riley described his conversation with the accused. Dr. Kilburn described the child's presentation and his subsequent decision to retain the stomach contents. Dr. Scattergood presented his chemical findings in full. The jury withdrew for a period of less than 1 hour. They returned a verdict of wilful murder against Mary Ann Cotton, and she was committed to Durham Jail to await trial at the Durham Assizes. The house on Johnson Terrace was sealed. In the months that followed her committal, the authorities undertook a broader examination of Mary Ann Cotton's history. Orders were made for the exhumation of several bodies connected to the accused. The work was conducted under the direction of Dr. Scattergood, assisted by local physicians, and proceeded across 3 counties through the autumn and winter of 1872. The body of Frederick Cotton, Jr., interred at St. Helen, Auckland, was examined in August. Arsenic was found. The body of Joseph Natras, a man who had lodged with the accused and who had died in the spring of 1872, was exhumed from the churchyard at West Auckland. Arsenic was found. The body of Robert Robson Cotton, an infant, was similarly examined. Arsenic was found. In each instance, Dr. Scattergood's report noted the presence of arsenic in the liver, stomach, and intestinal contents in quantities consistent with repeated administration over a period of days. The distribution of the poison within the tissues indicated, in his professional opinion, that the substance had been introduced through ingestion. It had not accumulated through environmental exposure, nor was it consistent with any preparation then in legitimate medical use. The question of means was addressed by the investigation of local purchases. Arsenic was, in the 1870s, widely available. It was sold openly by chemists and general merchants, principally as a component of soft soap used for the treatment of bedbug infestations in the walls of working-class dwellings. A woman purchasing it would excite little notice. No specific purchase by Mary Ann Cotton was traced with certainty, but the means required no elaboration. It was present in every corner shop in the county. The case against her was, by the close of 1872, one of the most thoroughly documented poisoning investigations the Northern courts had seen. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and bringing these forgotten histories to light. We read every comment, so please do share your thoughts on the case below. Now, back to Durham, in the winter of 1872. Mary Ann Cotton remained in Durham jail through the winter months. She gave interviews to the press, in which she maintained her innocence with consistency and without obvious agitation. She was visited by a minister of the Wesleyan faith, with whose denomination she had long been associated, and she was reported to have prayed at length and in apparent earnestness. The formal charge of wilful murder in the death of Charles Edward Cotton was confirmed by the grand jury at Durham in February of 1873, and the date for trial was set. The trial of Mary Ann Cotton opened at the Durham Crown Court on the 5th of March, 1873, before Mr. Justice Archibald. The court was a formal chamber of stone and dark wood, its gallery filled before the first hour of proceedings, and the press benches occupied by correspondents from the Times, the Newcastle Daily Chronicle, and the Northern Echo. The case had by this point attracted considerable public attention across the north of England, and the approaches to the court were reported to have been thronged from an early hour. The prosecution was led by Mr. Charles Russell, who would in later years rise to become Lord Chief Justice of England. He presented the case with methodical precision. The evidence of Dr. Scattergood was placed before the jury in full, encompassing the results of 4 separate post-mortem examinations and the chemical analysis of each. The testimony of Mr. Riley regarding the accused's remark about Charles Edward, that the boy would not be long in any case, was read into the record. The insurance documents were produced and their sums itemized. The pattern of deaths across the preceding decade was laid before the jury with careful deliberation, though the indictment related solely to the death of Charles Edward Cotton. The defence, led by Mr. Thomas Campbell Foster, argued that arsenic might have entered the child's system through the green floral wallpaper common in working-class dwellings of the period, a compound known as Scheele's green, which contained copper arsenite and which was known to release arsenic vapour under damp conditions. It was a credible argument in principle, and it was advanced with skill. Dr. Scattergood, recalled under cross-examination, acknowledged the phenomenon, but maintained that the quantities found within the tissues were inconsistent with vapour exposure alone. Mary Ann Cotton did not give evidence. The jury retired on the afternoon of the 7th of March, 1873. They were absent for 57 minutes. Upon their return, the foreman delivered a verdict of guilty of wilful murder. Mr. Justice Archibald assumed the black cloth and passed sentence of death. Mary Ann Cotton stood without visible expression. She was escorted from the dock by 2 officers of the court. The gallery was cleared within the quarter hour. The execution of Mary Ann Cotton was fixed for the 9th of March, 1873, at Durham Jail, to be carried out by the hangman William Calcraft, who had held the office of public executioner for the Crown for more than 30 years. Calcraft was by this time an old man, his methods considered by many in the profession of forensic medicine to be imprecise. He favoured the short drop, which did not reliably produce the dislocation of the cervical vertebrae, then understood to cause immediate unconsciousness, and his work was attended, on occasion, by a prolonged conclusion. It was so on the morning of the 9th of March. The execution was carried out within the walls of Durham Jail, not publicly, as had been the case in previous decades. The Prison Act of 1865 had moved such proceedings indoors, away from the crowds that had once assembled at the scaffold's foot. Only the governor, the chaplain, the surgeon, and the required official witnesses were present. The chaplain read the office of the dead. The bolt was drawn at 8 o'clock in the morning. It was recorded in the governor's register that death was not immediate, and that 3 minutes elapsed before the surgeon confirmed the cessation of life. A black flag was raised above the gatehouse. Outside, in the street, a small number of people had gathered in silence. They dispersed without incident. The newspapers of the North received the news before noon. The Newcastle Daily Chronicle ran a full account across 2 columns. The Northern Echo, whose editor was a young man named William Thomas Stead, who would in later years become one of the most prominent journalists of the age, had already published extensively on the case, and now carried the final report with a restrained solemnity, that distinguished it from the more excitable coverage elsewhere. In the months and years that followed, a number of inquiries were made into the practices of the industrial burial societies through which the accused had collected the sums associated with each death. No substantial reform was immediately forthcoming. The societies continued to operate as before. The question of how a pattern of deaths distributed across so many parishes and so many years had escaped official notice was raised in correspondence, and then, in the manner of such questions, was set aside. The precise number of people who died at the hands of Mary Ann Cotton has never been established with certainty. Historians of the case have proposed figures ranging from 11 to 21. The available records do not resolve the matter, and a number of the relevant registers were imperfectly kept. At the churchyard of St. Helen, Auckland, and at the burial ground of West Auckland, the stones that mark the graves of Frederick Cotton Jr., Joseph Nattrass, and Charles Edward Cotton stand close together. The inscriptions are worn now, the lettering filled with lichen. In spring the grass grows long between them. There is no stone for Mary Ann Cotton. The file remains in the record, bound in dust and silence,